The opioid crisis continues in many cities around the world, including right here in Lethbridge. In the United States, it seems that methamphetamines are flooding into many states. Joining me now to talk about this and other big issues from around the globe is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me from Los Angeles. Lisa, according to the Wall Street Journal, the meth issue is getting out of hand.
Yes. So this in the larger landscape of the overall war on drugs being quite successful. So the other numbers are down, but meth seems to be skyrocketing. And this is coming in through Mexico and hitting areas where before there was not such an issue, like the Northeast. The difference, obviously, with meth and other narcotics is that it is produced in a lab. It's not something that you have to wait for the harvest. You don't have to wait for it to be planted, and the government cannot crack down on the field. So in Colombia, for example, and parts of Mexico, you have initiatives where the government subsidizes your land in exchange for you to stop growing narcotics. But with meth, you don't have that control. Obviously, these are private labs. It's very lucrative, and it's being pushed right into the United States. So it's a very popular drug. And unfortunately, they will have to begin to crack down on this as well and pinpoint this.
U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton hammered North Korea over the weekend. Lisa, Bolton says Kim Jong-un is unwilling to take the necessary steps to reach a nuclear deal with the United States. North Korea is actually considering doing more ballistic missile testing?
That's right. So John Bolton here just pointing out the elephant in the room. This is really the reason why the two sides have not been able to come to some sort of resolution or make some sort of headway in the negotiations, despite meeting two times in the historic meetings between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. Both sides are waiting for the other one to make the first concession. Will the United States drop the sanctions first, or will the North Koreans show some sign of denuclearization, or at least show some promising signs or a timeline of how they will denuclearize? So now John Bolton is saying when the North Koreans last week said that they would begin missile tests once again, this is a very, very poor sign for the nature of the talks going forward and the ability to come together for some sort of resolution. So I think we're going to have to see some sort of compromise by the North Koreans, despite the fact that we've allowed them to play out the clock, despite the fact that we've been patient with them. Both Trump and Pompeo and Bolton in the past have said this is not going to be something that happens overnight. But despite the fact, they believe now, it seems, that we're not even moving in the right direction.
The eyes of the world are currently watching to see if the United States and China can finally reach a trade deal, whereas enforcement is the key to ensuring the Chinese government keeps its promises. Now, how will the Trump administration go about doing that?
Right. This is going to become very difficult because nowadays, in the case of warfare across the board, it's very difficult to watch our enemies. Why? Because it's mostly on cyber, whether it's cyber terrorism or cyber espionage or the stealing of our secrets through emails or through patents, through tech and industry secrets. And this is what the Chinese has been notorious for. So in the case of the Chinese, we have allowed them, obviously, to take advantage of markets, but more so in the past decade, they have gotten ahead through stealing these types of secrets. So enforcement will be the key to watch them to not steal this intellectual property to get ahead. What they seem to do so well, whether it's in drones or weapons or computer software or phone software, is to steal these secrets and then be able to produce it much more cheaply for the world market. So this is something we'll have to watch and keep a tight eye on them.
The problems continue in Maduro's Venezuela. Lisa, now there's talk of more corruption, but this time involving Cuban doctors to coerce Venezuelan voters. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is an awful story when you read about this through the lens of a doctor, and this is just one anecdote, but it's obviously repeated over and over again about what Maduro did in the lead up to his May elections by flooding the country with doctors. And as we know, there is a shortage of medical care, pharmaceuticals, oxygen, cancer treatments, et cetera, in the country, just as there is with all the other basic necessities like food. And what he did was flood the country with these doctors, but the doctors were not allowed to give treatment. What they had to do was wait until that brink or that cutting point where people needed the oxygen or whatever treatment so badly that it would be in exchange for a vote, so that Maduro can win the election. And this, I mean, these accounts are just so gut wrenching. And to think that this dictator, I mean, somebody who burns humanitarian aid on the way to people who need it, his constituents who need it so badly and are starving in the streets of Venezuela, of course he would be very much capable of doing such a thing. But when you read the details of these horrific accounts, it's really bone chilling.
Here in Alberta, we rely heavily on the energy sector. Oil and gas is a big part of who we are, and getting more pipelines built so we can get our oil to market. In Iran, which also relies heavily on oil, that country is blaming the United States for market tensions.
Yes. So finally, the United States got it right in the sense that the sanctions on the oil industry, which are meant to be very targeted sanctions that affect mostly the government of Iran and not so much the people of Iran, as we were seeing in the past, this is where they are suffering. And the numbers show that they are suffering. They are looking to sue the United States over sanctions placed on their government. That's the latest news out of Iran just today. But obviously, it's effective. And I think that is the major takeaway here, that sanctions work, that economic penalties work. And that is the best way to employ this diplomacy over a rogue regime like the Iranian regime.
The Yellow Vest protests are simply getting out of hand. I mean, we've seen the visuals here with Bridge City News. You've seen them as well, Lisa. There were another 100 protesters arrested recently. Lots of violence, damage, and looting going on. French President Macron says he's going to be cracking down. But when?
Yes, I spoke to actually a French source over the weekend, and he said it exactly the way you set it up, Hal, that this happens every weekend. It just happens every weekend. It's just something that is continuous. It's not as effective on either side anymore because it just is going on and on. And, you know, it seems pretty much contained in the sense that it's not growing. It's not gaining any momentum with regards to its political message. And I think that when a lot of these different grievances got mixed into it, it lost its core agenda, and it lost a lot of those initial supporters of the protests. So you have this, you know, muck of a mixture of individuals who are disenchanted with different parts of society, with very different political points of view, actually. And Macron, of course, this is going to be, you know, his Achilles heel for now, but it doesn't seem like he is too troubled by it, or perhaps he just can't go any harder because then it will implode. So I think he's okay with it just maybe fizzling out, and it seems that that's the direction it's going to go into.
Now, speaking of protests, the UN Mideast envoy is condemning the Hamas crackdown on street protests. Tell me more about that.
This is a wonderful story. This is something that I actually reported on in 2014, and that is namely to look away from the Israeli-Palestinian crisis and to look more closely at the disenchantment of the Palestinians towards their own leadership, Hamas. Meaning, you know, the specific story that I remember doing was with an interview with a father whose 4-year-old daughter had smoke inhalation from a missile that was sent into Gaza by the Israelis. And when I interviewed this man, you'd think he'd be so upset and mad at Israelis, and it creates, you know, more of this animosity between the two sides. And he said, let me correct you. We're actually not mad at the Israelis. We're mad at Hamas, our leadership that failed us. And I think that these protests that have sprung up again after 5 years just show you, you know, that everyday life under the Palestinian leadership is very different from everyday life under Israeli leadership. And you have Arabs who live under Israeli rule and are very happy and are treated very well and live in a sovereign nation. But for the Palestinians, the way of life that's taught is a very pro-terrorist, very, you owe Hamas, your life is basically owed to a terror organization. And that is no way to live, to teach your children to hate and to throw rocks and to be unemployed and to play this victim mindset. And as you know, the headlines have been going back and forth over the last week or so with Hamas in Gaza lodging missiles into Tel Aviv. And then there was a murder of 2 individuals in the West Bank yesterday. So this continues and it continues and it continues. But what the world media is missing is this story, in fact, about the Palestinians being mad at their own leadership, being led by a terror organization. It's not tit for tat. It's not Israel against another nation. It's Israel against a terror organization. And let us hear the story from the mouths of their own people, the Palestinian people, who are mad at their leadership, Hamas.
Lisa, you've covered the Middle East stories for a long time now. You've been to the Middle East as well. You've talked to other journalists in and around the region. What will it take for us to actually finally see peace in the Middle East?
Yeah, it's going to be very, very, very difficult. Almost every option has come and gone on the table, right? So there's been offers of land and there's been offers of treaties, and none of that has remained as a viable option. Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin got Nobel Prizes on the White House lawn under the watch of Bill Clinton. And, months later, we went right back to the same story and the same narrative and the same killing of innocent people. So until this narrative is erased from the Palestinian leadership that Israel has to be driven into the sea, then we're not going to get anywhere. And unfortunately, this has made its way into the United States Congress as well. We have individuals within the United States Congress that echo the sentiments of the Palestinian terror leadership that want to drive Israel off the map. So until we get rid of this mindset, there is no way for the two sides to live in peace. When you think that the other side should not exist, how are you going to be a partner in creating that existence between the two sides?
It's a battle, a war that's been going on for thousands of years. Lisa, the Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft has been banned from flying in many airspaces around the world, including right here in Canada, and I know in the United States as well, where you are. What have we learned so far with the similarities between the Ethiopian air crash, which killed 157, including 18 Canadians, and the Lion Air Indonesian crash last October, which claimed 189 lives?
Yes, so it seems like the main similarities that the reports have come back, well, they've come back basically saying that there are similarities, meaning that we can call this a similar crash. And the main characteristics are the fluctuation in altitude and the very erratic path that the plane took before crashing. So that makes a lot of sense in the way that it went down, the way that it crashed, the way that the plane malfunctioned. Now, also, other reports are showing basically the lacking of the 737 in training pilots correctly. From what I'm reading, a lot of these pilots were trained to go from one plane to the 737 on an iPad. That's where they would pass or kind of get their training for this kind of a flight, just to make it easier on the pilots, to make it very low maintenance. You can go from one plane to this plane very easily. So I think as time goes by, they're going to be very, very meticulous at looking at the shortcomings of this plane and how it's caused so many problems. And I'm glad that Canada and the U.S., even though they were the last ones to hold out, they did ground these flights. Obviously not something that people, any nation wants to do in kind of limiting its air traffic or limiting business or any company from doing its job. But this is safety, and safety is first and foremost, obviously.
And what's interesting too, the aviation experts that we've talked to on BCN basically said that they're more fuel efficient, these new 737 MAX 8s, because the engines are further forward as well. But that also impacts the flight pattern and the power of these aircraft, and the pilots are just not equipped or well trained, like you said, to handle these airplanes.
Right. It's unbelievable.
It is. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.